Good morning, church family, and welcome to the Daily Word. Our passage today is Mark 15, verses 27 on to 47, finishing out chapter 15 in the death of Christ. Mark begins, at least in this section that we're reading, the crucifixion being with two robbers. And many people still mocking Jesus, okay? And then saying, save yourself, come down from the cross. He saved others, he can't save himself. And we see in that moment that the mockery was not over. It would not end until Jesus' life had ended. And then the 6th hour came, Mark says. There's darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. So this is a crucifixion like no one else's crucifixion. There had never been accounts of sudden darkness and all of these things happening in nature. At the 9th hour, in verse 34, Jesus cries out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, scholars have debated for ages what that abandonment was like. What did God forsake him of? What does that mean? Was he no longer God? Was he not in favor with God? On and on and on. But here's the deal. Mark doesn't want us to try to explain the nature or the extent of the abandonment. He just wants us to share in the agony. He wants the reader to feel the agony of abandonment as God, the Son, literally cries out. And notice, with a loud voice. Accounts of crucifixion would be associated with weakening strength. No men or woman being able to yell from the cross. And here, of course, Jesus, who's denied any type of medicine or drug or alcohol or any other form of relief, is with a loud voice crying out from the cross. Mark wants us to see the agony, but also his strength still in death. And then Jesus, in verse 37, uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. He gave up his spirit. He laid down his own life. Just like John 10 talks about him being the good shepherd, he laid his life down. Nobody took it from him. He's buried by Joseph of Arimathea, which was prophesied. And then Pilate, surprised in verse 44 to hear that he should have died already, clearly noting that this was faster. Jesus, again, gave up his life. Nobody took it. Jesus did not suffer for an extended period of time in a way that was beyond what he would allow or what he would give. He gave up his life. In other accounts of the Gospels, this is why the spear went into his side and blood and water poured out. He was already dead. Normally, they would break the legs of somebody being crucified so that they could no longer push themselves up to breathe. They didn't need to do that with Jesus, which again kept with prophecy from Isaiah that no bones would be broken. He was bruised for our iniquity, but his bones were never broken. And he was laid to rest in the tomb, and they rolled the stone against the entrance of the tomb. Friend, this is a story of great sorrow, but it is the reason that we have victory. When we talk about the victory of the cross and the power of the cross, we cannot overlook the sorrow of the cross. I am reminded of Romans 8, a great chapter talking about us being overcomers and God not sparing his own son and nobody being able to bring a charge against the elect of God and nothing being able to separate us from his love. And the reason why we will never be separated from God is because he abandoned his own son. He poured out his full wrath upon his own son for you, for me, for the lost of this world, his people who had run far from him, who sinned against him, for those of us who are so forgetful of him. He poured out his wrath on his son so that you could be drawn near. And then we can look at Romans 8 with a full picture of what that means and say, we know that all things work together for good for those who are called according to God's purposes. For those whom he foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those who he called, he justified. And them who he justified, he also glorified. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? My encouragement to you is to never rejoice in the love from God and the charge against anyone who would come against God's people from God and all the promises of God without reflecting on verse 32 of Romans 8, which is that he did not spare his own son, but he gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? Reflect today on what was given up for you, on the abandonment of God's Son, so that you would never be abandoned. Tomorrow, we'll look at the resurrection and see why that power is the reason we can celebrate victory.